Alright YouTube, so we are finally here with Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade / episode Intermission. Finally finished the Yuffie DLC yesterday. So of course I want to sort of like review it, give my thoughts on the Yuffie DLC. For starters, just the PS5 version of Remake is nice, dude. Visually it's great, but the performance, like frame rate and shit like that, that's the main thing I've noticed. Because me personally, whenever I play video games, I spin the camera around a lot. It's just like a force of habit, I think, from playing a lot of FPS games. But there's no motion blur like at all. Like it's crisp, it's clean all the time. I absolutely love it. I haven't even booted up base game Remake yet with the PS5 just because I instantly hopped into the Yuffie DLC because of course it's the new stuff, I had to check it out. I do have a lot of thoughts on the Yuffie DLC, both positive and negative. You know we're always honest here on the channel. For starters, I love Yuffie's combat. Like the gameplay with Yuffie is fun. She might be my favorite character right now for playing. My favorite character in terms of combat when it came to Remake was Barret. I just liked hanging back and shooting people. I never really liked to get in too up and close and personal characters. I like the computer do that, issue commands to the teammates. I liked hanging back and just shooting with Barret. Obviously, at certain times you were forced to switch to other characters, and I did cycle between, but generally speaking, my favorite was Barret. And with Yuffie, you can do both. You can fight up and close if you want to. You can hang back, you can throw the shuriken at them and just hang back and do your ninjutsu, your elemental ninjutsu, and all that other shit. So having the ability to do both with her was pretty nice. I can also see why people were saying that she was a pretty broken character. I don't know if she's better or worse than Tifa, because Tifa was by far the strongest in base game Remake. But having that elemental ninjutsu is crazy, because you're always going to have the weakness that an enemy has, assuming that they have an elemental weakness. But of course, going forward with Remake, if they eventually add in like the earth element and like water element, and if they don't give that ninjutsu to Yuffie, that would kind of make her less broken, because when there's enemies that are weak to those things, she wouldn't have the ninjutsu for that. But also maybe she could have weapons that would teach her those elements, I don't know. As for the character of Yuffie, I think they did a great job. She's pretty funny. This DLC's actually got a decent amount of comedy in it throughout both chapters.
Here you go.
But they also do a pretty good job of getting across that she is kind of immature and kind of young. She is 16. Like, our main party's mostly like low 20s or whatever. Like, Sid's 30, I think. Barret might be 30s as well. But like Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith are like low 20s, but she's just a teenager. She's just 16 years old, so she's pretty immature, even though she's a badass. The other obvious important part of this DLC is Yuffie's companion, Sonon, who is your guest character throughout the 2 chapters that you can't control, which is pretty weird because you can do pretty much everything with him except control him. You can issue him commands, make him use items, make him use magic, make him use abilities, make him use summon abilities. He can control what Rama does. He even has his own weapons that you progress and level up with weapon cores, and you can swap materia to him. Like, he's literally everything except controllable, so I don't know why he's not controllable. It's super weird. I thought it was kind of cool, but if we can kind of delve into a little bit of the negatives here with this DLC, you don't get a lot of time with him. And I know his backstory is that Shinra killed his sister, Melfi, but, like, you don't get any time with him and Melfi either. Like, there's not one flashback of her not dying. Like, the only flashbacks you get are the sepia-tone flashbacks of her being killed by Shinra. I think we could have used at least one flashback where it's just Melfi and Sonon hanging out as brother and sister. So we kind of get their connection, how close they were. Maybe they're just hanging out in Wutai, joking around with each other, something like that. And with Sonon being a completely brand new character, we need more time with him to give a shit about what happens to him later on in the DLC. But we're already having to like get to know this character, and then his motivation is his sister being killed, which is a character we know even less about. So it's just like, I kind of feel nothing, if that makes any sense. As for the combat with Yuffie and Sonon, I didn't really use the synergizing stuff too much, like, at all, really, because I played the game on normal, so it's not really that hard. The only boss fight or anything that was even difficult was at the very end of the game, which we'll get to when we get there. But maybe the synergizing abilities and shit like that is something that's more helpful or useful when it comes to hard mode, because I just never really felt the need to use it. It is kind of exciting for the future, though, that maybe we can get like synergized or combo attacks with the rest of our party going forward. Some other cool stuff about this DLC is that it opens up new areas within like the Sector 7 slums. So, for example, the area where Tifa and Cloud go and save Johnny from the Shinra troopers, like you do a fight there, and then you open up a gate in the back of there and go to like a little brand new area, and then also over by the train station, like we open up a gate and go chase down ZG, I think his name is, or something like that, when he's getting chased, and there's a whole big area that way that we didn't have in base game, which is kind of cool.
Hey, hold up! Try it. You'll love it. Foreigners and their weak jaws.
For Condor is pretty fun, man. It's not too hard to figure out, and as you progress and get better boards, it gets easier. Like, I ran back through hard mode just to get to beat the Grandmaster on hard mode and beat him in the first try with the Grandmaster board. It's not really complicated, but it is fun. I see a lot of potential with it. I do hope it's something we get going forward. I'd love to, every time we go to a new town, there's like a handful of NPCs that we could play Fort Condor with. Like, that'd be pretty cool. And when I say it's not hard, I just mean, like, for me, like, I played a lot of Clash Royale, and that's exactly what this is, more or less. 3 towers, you have a pool of resource to, like, summon your troops in Clash Royale with your cards. I'm just used to playing this kind of game, so it was just kind of easy once I figured it out. I do hope going forward, if this ends up being in the future remake games, that they improve upon it, add to it, all kinds of different boards and stuff like that. Because I miss having that in Final Fantasy games. Like Blitzball and FF10, I know that's hit or miss for some people, but I absolutely love it. The card games in 8 and 9, or even like Gwent within Witcher 3. Like, I love having a mini game or a side game that I can invest a shit ton of time into, that you can get better at, and has its own story and questing and all that other shit. And from there, my dudes, we kind of have to drift into a mostly negative territory. But again, I'm always honest with you guys. I'm just telling you how I feel when it comes to this stuff. For starters, most of my negatives are going to have to do with the length of the DLC. It is only 2 chapters, and it costs $20. If you want to do some basic math there, remake upon launch, $60, 18 chapters, $20, 2 chapters. So for a third of the price, you're only getting a ninth of the game. There's plenty of other games out there that I've played over the years that offer more content with their DLC for less price. Even within the Final Fantasy series, with the episodes, the character episodes that they had for that game, they were only $5, and they're varying in length, but Episode Prompto, for example, $5. It's like a 2-hour DLC, about 4.5 hours if you're trying to do everything, and that's about as big as the Yuffie DLC. The Yuffie DLC is about 4 to 5 hours, roughly, and you got Episode Prompto for $5. Now, to be perfectly clear here, I don't feel burned by my purchase. It's just $20. It's not the biggest deal, and it only costs you money if you upgrade for free. Now, if you're buying Intergrade, whether digital or physical, you're going to get the Yuffie DLC as a part of that, so you're not paying anything for it. But still, if you compare it to just other DLC within the franchise, it's just simply not worth the value. On top of that, the DLC doesn't add anything to the remake story, as in it doesn't further what's going on in remake. Is it a sequel? Is it a prequel? Whatever, all that other shit. It adds nothing. It's just Yuffie coming to Midgar for the materia that she doesn't get. The ultimate materia that she wants to still have the Shinra HQ that they don't even have. They're still making it. They haven't even crafted it yet. So the entire story, so to speak, is kind of pointless. It's kind of the problem we talked about before, because people wanted like the cut Tifa chapter turned into DLC, but having a DLC that's set in the past, what does that add to the overall story? And that's kind of the same thing here. It doesn't really add anything. You get a little bit of character development, I suppose, with Yuffie, but it's not really much, because she's pretty much the same Yuffie throughout the whole DLC up until the end with what happens with Sonon. Also, kind of furthering the discussion with the story is that Yuffie and Sonon get to the Shinra HQ super easily because they're working with a different cell of Avalanche compared to what Cloud was working with, and they have better connections. So they get like the 2 IDs and they get to just ride the train up to Shinra HQ, 0 problems, and it was kind of surprising because before going into playing the game, I knew it was only 2 chapters. We've known that forever, but I didn't know what we're going to be doing. I was kind of hoping we get to go through some of the areas that we went through with Remake, like maybe Yuffie and Wall Market, because they talk about that. They joke about Wall Market and how it's for, you know, older people, mature people, whatever. And they could have done some funny stuff with Yuffie in that location, and they already have the assets for that, for the base game remake, all of that, right? They could have simply just had Yuffie and Sonon going through some of those locations from base game remake and just adding some story and questing there, but they don't. It's entirely within Sector 7 slums, kind of the area surrounding that, and then straight up to the Shinra HQ. That's it. Actually, hopping back to the story-related stuff, some of the earlier gameplay that I showed, Yuffie runs into, I think, several different, like, reunion guys, the cloaked figures or whatever, but nothing comes of it. Like, we don't get anything with that. She just sees them a few times. I think they're different ones. I didn't look at their numbers. Like, they could have done something with that. They could have furthered the reunion stuff, Hojo, Sephiroth, something. I don't know how they would have done it, but it seems like they're almost just crammed in there. Anyways, as for once you're actually in the Shinra building, we do get to see a lot of new stuff that didn't exist within the base game remake, right? We get to see the basement, deep ground, all that other stuff. So that was kind of cool. Getting some new areas within the Shinra building, kind of fleshing out that location. But it is pretty much just, again, kind of a gauntlet. You just find a bunch of enemies over and over. I think something they could have done to maybe fix the story with the DLC to make it matter more to the overall story for Remake is after Scarlet reveals her plans to them, Sonon and Yuffie, that they're going to drop the Sector 7 plate, like, they give up on their plan of hunting the materia and go and try to, like, save people, rescue people. Maybe Sonon could die in that way instead of the way that he does die. Because they try to make it seem like Yuffie gives a shit about the destruction of Sector 7 at the end, but prior to that, like, it doesn't seem like she cares. She doesn't really care about Midgar because Midgar's trying to destroy Wutai and shit, right? So her crying stuff at the end just doesn't make a lot of sense, because she could have attempted to stop it at least. And if they would have had like Yuffie and Sonon go into like the Sector 7 slums to try to warn people, try to save people, they could have made it to where Yuffie was the one that saved Biggs, because Biggs, we thought, died on the pillar, right? But he shows up at the Leaf House. We still don't know how that happened. Possibly she could have saved Jesse if Jesse is also alive. We could have had an answer for that, and it'd have been pretty cool to have connected Yuffie back to Avalanche. But instead, the story that we get with the ending of the DLC is we defeat Scarlet in her robot or whatever, and then she just pushes a button on her thigh, I shit you not, and releases Nero. and that's where you get the Nero Deep Ground stuff. Like, I'm pretty sure they tease like Deep Ground related stuff with base game remake, but it's so out of nowhere, bro. There's no build up to it. Just constantly at all times, Scarlet carries a button on her thigh to release Nero just in case she's in danger. It's just kind of ridiculous. It literally comes out of nowhere. But it was cool to see Nero. You also physically get to see Vice, which I thought was pretty cool because a lot of people thought he was just going to be relegated to like the simulation, but we actually do physically see him, which means he's 100% going to be showing up at some point later on in the story. As for Nero, and this is speaking from somebody that has not ever played Dirge of Cerberus, I do think they did a pretty good job with him. He's pretty cool. They get across how strong he is. It's actually the only hard fight, so to speak, within normal difficulty. I actually died a couple times to him, and then kind of had to take it seriously, respect the loadout, all that other shit to make sure I could beat him. But obviously, after you defeat Nero, he either kills Sonon or, fucks him up and he's going to take him and we're going to fight Sonon as a bad guy later on. I don't know what they're doing with it exactly, but this is where you actually get some blood, which was cool. Like, that's one of the glowing praises I have about this DLC is finally we get some realistic shit happening. Somebody gets stabbed, we see some fucking blood. Nero is, so far, the baddest motherfucker within FF7 Remake because we get to actually see him stab people when they bleed. But this is yet again where another issue happens, in my opinion. Yuffie doesn't know Sonon. She's known him for about a couple of hours. They meet, because the entire DLC takes place in like the same day. Like, Yuffie arrives within the Sector 7 slums during the daytime. You see the sunset. Nighttime, they're in the Shinra HQ. And then we do all this stuff here, and then Sonon dies. And she is, as you're seen on screen, just distraught, in tears, cannot believe he's dying. It'd be different if they were already acquaintances or it's somebody that she's known forever in Muay Thai. And she probably does know him to some degree because he did train under Godo, but they don't get that point across. We don't know the relationship. He introduces himself to Yuffie earlier in the DLC, so all we can assume is that they don't know each other at all.
Anyway, it's nice to meet you. I'm Sonon Kusakabe. I was lucky enough to learn how to fight from good...
Yeah, I don't want to talk about him.
Also, the scene doesn't really work because we barely even know Sonon. So, like, they're trying to make this, like, heroic gesture. He's dying, it's tragic, he's getting visions of his sister. But, like, again, we don't barely know him, and we don't know shit about his dead sister either. Overall, I think the biggest misstep, the biggest flaw with this DLC is length. It needed another chapter or two. We needed Yuffie and Sonon to build a relationship so that it makes sense when she's crying over him. They should have at least got to know each other over the course of at least a couple of days within the story. And we could have used more time with the character of Sonon at all so that we give a shit when he dies. Because again, it's such breakneck speed. It's such a short DLC. We barely get to know the character. So this whole scene right here that you're watching in the background it doesn't hit you. You don't feel anything because we barely know Sonon and then he's gone. Overall, my dudes, I did enjoy my experience. It's a fun little DLC. Is it worth $20? Not really. It'd be better if it was a little bit cheaper. Yuffie's fun to play with. I'm excited to get into my hard mode playthrough. Again, I'm enjoying the gameplay. It's fun to play, but it's just, there's not much of a story or really anything here. Look, my dudes, I know it's a mostly negative video, but again, I am as honest as I can be on the channel. This is how I feel, this is how I feel. Unless there's some sort of like underlying story that I'm missing here that just kind of went over my head or some shit, there's just not a lot here in terms of like adding to the FF7 Remake story, other than a little bit of character development for Yuffie. Also, fuck paying $10 for the CAC Star weapon, I'm good. But my dudes, that is pretty much going to be the video. That's my review, my thoughts on the Yuffie DLC episode intermission. If they do more of this stuff in the future, if there's more DLC for Remake going forward, I'm fine with it. I'll still get it. $20. If it's one chapter for $20, I'll probably still get it. I might bitch about it then too. But I just hope it's better. I hope the price to content ratio is better, and I just hope it adds to the story more. But of course, pass off to you guys as usual. For those of you that have played episode intermission, or maybe even if you watched like a Let's Play, if you know what all takes place within the DLC, what were your initial thoughts whenever it was over? Either way, that's the video, my dudes. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys already want to see more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter, @DavidYT, and my Discord. Links to social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Low Gain, or leave it like Cobain.